The damp smell of swamp and dirt filled the air as I stood at the edge of what used to be my backyard, watching Laura from the neighborhood council argue with a city inspector while her oversized house slowly sank deeper into the marsh. The sound of emergency sirens echoed from parked vehicles, and frogs croaked from front lawns. Somewhere across the swamp, an old mailbox floated by like a piece of driftwood. Yeah, that's me. You're probably wondering how we ended up here. I never thought that a small stream running through my yard would turn into a battle zone, but that's exactly what happened. For years, that little creek was my retreat, my quiet place. After long days working as a plumber, fixing pipes and crawling through attics, I'd kick back in an old chair by the creek, a beer in one hand, fishing pole in the other. I'd never catch much, just the occasional sunfish. Dragonflies zipped around the tall reeds, the air smelled fresh, and the only sound at night was the soft flow of water. It was peace, peace you didn't mess with. Then came the neighborhood association, or rather, Laura and her group. The HOA had always been on the other side of the development, hidden away in their identical houses with their matching mailboxes and perfectly placed garden gnomes. We, the people by the creek, were the old-timers, the ones who lived here before the fancy subdivisions and paved streets. But things changed fast. New lines were drawn, the HOA grew, and before we knew it, they were in our faces telling us how to live. My first real encounter with them was when Laura knocked on my door one muggy Saturday. She was holding a clipboard like it was a shield, wearing workout gear, even though she looked like she'd never seen the inside of a gym. She introduced herself as the community standards chair, and I told her I was busy. She didn't care. She had concerns about my property, specifically the creek. She told me the creek was an unapproved water feature and that it posed a danger to kids and animals. I stared at her, confused, like she'd accused my dog of running a secret gambling ring. The creek had been there long before any of us moved in. It was as much a part of the land as the trees and rocks. But Laura didn't care. She had rules, rules about water, rules about landscaping, rules about everything. I tried to explain the creek was a natural drainage channel, protected by county laws, but she just wrote something down on her clipboard and huffed away, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and irritation in the air. A couple of days later, I got my first violation notice. It accused me of dangerous water features and attracting foreign species, as if frogs were some kind of invader. I ignored it. Then came another one, this time threatening fines of $100 a day unless I submitted a plan to fix it. So, I wrote a letter quoting local laws and attached a map showing the creek's legal status. They responded with a mandatory inspection. That inspection was something else. 3 strangers wandered around my backyard with measuring tapes and smartphones, taking pictures like they were gathering evidence for a criminal trial. Laura stood on the edge of my yard, tapping her foot as I crossed my arms, daring them to step into the creek. They didn't, but they made a lot of notes. A week later, at the HOA meeting, Laura stood in front of a bored crowd and declared that my creek was a safety hazard. She blamed insurance risks, wildlife, and erosion. The fact that she lived next to a swampy marsh seemed lost on her. When I stood up to argue, she handed me a packet of demands. Fence the creek, fill it in, or endure weekly inspections at my own expense. I told her where she could shove her papers. Things only got worse after that. I started finding complaints about my overgrown property stuck to my door. My mailbox was knocked over. Someone dumped rocks into the creek, blocking the flow. One day, I caught Laura herself sitting in her SUV across the street, taking pictures of my yard like some sort of undercover agent. Still, I refused to back down. I kept the creek wild, kept the weeds trimmed, and made sure the water flowed. It was my land, my creek, my right to enjoy it. But I should have known they'd take it further. One Wednesday morning, as I was sipping coffee on my porch, I heard the rumble of heavy machinery. I thought it was just road work, but the sound grew closer. I stood up just in time to see a cement truck backing down the alley behind my house. A guy in a safety vest guided it into position over the creek, ready to dump concrete. I rushed over, shouting, "What do you think you're doing?" The guy barely glanced at me. "Following work orders," he said. Before I could stop them, concrete started pouring into my creek. I tried to charge at them, but I slipped in the wet grass and fell hard. By the time I got back up, the cement was already spreading, covering the rocks, drowning the reeds. Frogs jumped in panic, but some were too slow and got trapped in the mess. The workers ignored me, and by the time they were done, my once beautiful creek was a gray, lifeless trench. Laura stood across the street, arms crossed, smiling like she'd just won a battle. I wiped mud from my eyes, stood up, and smiled back. Let her have this round. She had no idea what kind of storm she'd just unleashed. The first rain after that was a relief, cooling the air and washing away the dust. But when a storm hit, there was no creek to handle it. The water just pooled in my yard, and soon it flooded the street. The storm drains couldn't keep up. Water spilled over curbs, and the neighborhood quickly became a mess of muddy lakes and swamped lawns. But the HOA wasn't about to admit their mistake. They blamed the residents for improper lawn grading and clogged drains, never mentioning the concrete they had poured into the creek. The situation grew worse, and the tension between neighbors rose. People who had once been friendly started accusing each other of causing the flooding. Laura ramped up her efforts, writing more violation notices, holding more meetings. But the truth hung in the air. Everyone could see it. The concrete was to blame. I kept documenting everything. I took pictures of the flooding, made notes, and even started flying my drone to capture the water problems from above. I didn't say much at the HOA meetings. I just played the part, pretending to be a naive homeowner while quietly gathering evidence. Then, the storm of the century hit. The streets turned into rivers, and homes started cracking under the pressure. Foundations shifted, walls cracked, people's basements flooded. The neighborhood was sinking, and the HOA didn't know how to stop it. Laura tried to blame everyone else, but the evidence was clear. I'd been collecting it for months, and now it was time for the truth to come out. The city launched an investigation, and soon the news picked it up. Laura's precious HOA was under scrutiny. They couldn't deny it any longer. Eventually, Laura's empire crumbled. The HOA was dissolved, and the neighborhood voted to restore the creek, bringing back the natural drainage system. People worked together, removing the concrete and letting the water flow freely again. It was like the land had taken a deep breath and finally let go. I planted a small wooden sign at the head of the creek, carving a simple message for all to see. Nature always wins. Laura left the neighborhood not long after that. Her house sat empty, swallowed by the swamp she had created. New families moved in, and they never asked about the past. They just enjoyed the restored creek and the healthy, thriving land. And every now and then, I still sit by the creek, listening to the water flow, feeling the earth beneath my boots. Because no matter how hard people try to control the land, it will always find its way back. Nature will always win. In the end, nature proved its strength, reclaiming what was always its own. Laura and her HOA might have thought they could bend the land to their will, but they underestimated the resilience of the earth. They believed that with enough rules and concrete, they could control the flow of time and water. But they were wrong. Nature doesn't bend. It endures. It waits, and when the time is right, it reclaims what was taken from it. As the creek flowed freely again, life returned to the land. The frogs croaked, the dragonflies zipped through the air, and the soft murmur of the water became a familiar song once more. The neighborhood had learned a hard lesson, but in the end, they found peace. People came together to restore what was lost, proving that when we respect the land and its rhythms, it rewards us with the harmony we seek. For me, it wasn't just about winning. It was about standing up for something that mattered. It was about defending the quiet, simple joys, the peaceful evenings by the water, the hum of life in its natural state. The land had won, and with it, I found something far more valuable than a battle won: true, lasting peace.